if talking about it is what it takes to heal, I'm going to talk to somebody who it's actually going to benefit. Because at that time when I was dealing with such severe survivor's guilt, helping myself was not enough. I had zero motivation to help myself. But if I could help someone else, that might chip away at that guilt a little bit.
Hello, sweet friends. I'm Stephanie Jacobs, a storyteller and advocate for social justice, and your host of the Love Light Stories podcast, a place where we uncover a deeper understanding of humanity through beautiful, redemptive stories that inspire our hearts. If you long to see more love, empathy, and true connection in our world and your own life, you're in the right place. After spending multiple years studying social justice issues, I've realized the power story has in helping us to understand, empathize, and transform our worldviews into something that's just that, views that are truly worldly. Here in this space, we'll embrace our humanity through raw and authentic stories told by real people themselves. We'll amplify their voices and learn to connect in more meaningful ways. Poverty, human trafficking, incarceration, race, immigration, and more. We'll embrace difficult conversations, sometimes controversial topics, and lighthearted stories too. If you wish to uncover the hope, love, empathy, and connection we can find in our fellow humanity, this is the show for you. So, are you ready, lovely? Let's jump in. Well, hello there, lovely. Welcome back to the Love Light Stories podcast, where we create space for real, personal stories to be seen, heard, and understood. If you haven't yet, be sure to rate the show, subscribe, and share it with your family and friends. Today on the podcast, I'm welcoming Jessica Rasdall. When she was a freshman in college, she made a life-altering decision that resulted in the death of her best friend. In an effort to raise awareness, cope with her guilt, and keep her friend's memory alive, she began sharing her story. Jessica spoke to over 15,000 young adults across the country before she was sentenced to prison. In this story, you'll get to hear from Jessica about what it was like to walk through such an incredibly difficult season in her life. We dig into what she was thinking, feeling, and experiencing, while also digging into what the public was saying about her and more. Since then, Jessica has shared her story for over 16 years and has been featured on major international media outlets such as ABC's 2020, Katie Couric, The Guardian, MTV, Netflix, and many more. Today, Jessica is fiercely dedicated to helping small business owners share their own stories too. And before we dive in, here's a little challenge to help you apply this episode to your own life. As we get into this story, pay attention to the thoughts and feelings that surface inside of you. Are they full of judgment? Or grace, perhaps? Notice how what the public was saying about her was exactly the opposite of her motivations. Does your mind ever wander to form quick assumptions too? I know mine does. This is a great episode to gain perspective and keep challenging yourself to continually hold grace for those around you. It's a great reminder for me too. Things aren't always the way they seem. Oh, and excuse the kiddos in the background and the phone ringing at one point in the conversation. She was in the midst of transitioning her family into a situation where they could better help a family member. So just a little bit of grace there, please. And I really can't wait for you to hear this conversation. Jessica, thank you so much for joining me today on the Love Light Stories podcast. It is just a pleasure to finally meet you and get to hear a little bit about your story. I know, I can't imagine it must have been in the moment, what you said 16 years ago that
16 years.
Yeah, that it was a really, really hard thing to walk through. I'm just going to let you start by sharing a little bit about what happened and we can go from there.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Like, such an honor. But I was a college freshman, and I think like most college freshmen, you're at a season where it's this fresh start and you have your whole world and life ahead of you. And while I didn't know exactly what my plans were going to be for the future, I knew I was going to do something, right? I was focused. I was a college freshman. I was there on scholarship. I was ready to do big things. And it wasn't until one Friday night, my best friend and I, who I had known since I was 5 years old, went out one Friday night and we never made it home. 5 minutes from her dorm room, less than a mile from home, there was an accident. And my car spun off the interstate, rolled into a tree, and Laura was killed on impact. And I was inches from my own death. The only reason I'm talking to you today is because I'm so short. And when the roof caved in, I was severely injured, but was able to make it out. In a matter of moments, I went from worrying about midterms and what I was going to major in and writing my next paper to, am I going to make it out of this trauma unit? Like, am I going to be able to walk again? And when I found out that my friend, who I thought was a stranger next to me at the moment, did not make it out of the car, like, how would I ever go another day without her? How would I ever look in the mirror again or wash the blood off my hands? Everything was a question and there were no answers to be found.
What did it, in the moment when, did you wake up in the car, or was your first moment waking up in the ICU unit? What was that like?
For most people who have a severe traumatic experience like that, you don't remember most of it.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I do. And I woke up in the car right after the accident. I could see the cars speeding past on the interstate and nobody was stopping. I was there as they cut me out of the car. I was awake through all of this. And once they got to me, they kept me awake because I had a very, very bad head injury. And I had to stay awake through that, and over 400 stitches to reattach my ear and close the gash on my head. And I found out that Laura was in my car when I was in the trauma center. And I found out that she didn't make it when I overheard the officer telling my mother, he was getting ready to explain to her, that he had done a forcible blood draw on me. And as he begins to tell her about this paperwork right by my bed, I heard him say the words, because this was a fatality. And it was like instantly all the dots were connected. She was the one who'd been in my passenger seat. He said she was the fatality. She didn't make it. And I crumbled. I was hysterical, trying to pull the IVs out of my arm, screaming hysterically, not Laura, I killed my best friend, just hysterical. And you go to this place of just out of body moment, just losing it. And then an instant shock. Well, obviously they came and they medicated me and they restrained me because I was now at risk to myself. But it was almost like this cloud came over me. And I remember laying there lifelessly for 4 hours as they administered the stitches. And it was just nothing was real. None of these people moving around, nothing was real. I was just in this cloud at this point. And the way that we grieve and deal with traumatic experiences as humans is very strange and doesn't feel sometimes like there's much rhyme or reason. But, moments of complete denial to moments when I would pick up the phone and try to call her, and then it would hit me like a ton of bricks that she'll never answer that phone. And reality hits and hysterical again. It was just this roller coaster of my body trying to process what it could while my body was still trying to block out so much because I couldn't. I was trying to physically heal, let alone trying to emotionally even grasp what was going on. That was going to take some time.
Right. Your body was almost protecting itself from what it couldn't handle, the overwhelm. And not to mention, you were in the ICU trying to heal physically as well. And probably that affects your ability to think and grieve and all of that too. I can't imagine. You were just at your absolute max, physically, emotionally. I did a little research and stuff too on your story, and it seems as though her parents were pretty upset as well. What was that like to deal with amidst your own personal grief, but also trying to deal with, you know, her parents, who of course loved her so much too, were so upset over it?
It was not an easy time. I had known Laura since I was 5 years old. Mm-hmm. We'd gone to school together since kindergarten. And in the weeks prior to this accident, I helped with her younger sister. So they were both teachers, and I'd go to their house every morning at 6:00. Well, they had to leave to go to school, to work for them. And I would take her younger sister to school and drop her off. Like, I had a key to the house. We were very, very close. And so in this moment, to not just lose her, but to lose every connection to her was hard. But let's be honest, I have a very, very, very extreme case of survivor's guilt. So for me, there was this constant juggle of like the human emotions of wanting to be upset and sad and angry and not understanding why other people feel the way they do or what they're going through. And in that exact moment, being consumed with guilt and feeling like, of course they should not want to talk to me. Of course this, and being incredibly understanding of that. And looking back on, and even in that moment, I don't know how, it's so young. I was 18 years old when this happened. You know, we always say like, oh, I could never do this. I could never do that. I would never handle something like this. Like, you truly have no idea how you will handle something until it happens to you. And I could have never told you that should an accident like this happen to me, that I would go out and speak to hundreds of thousands of people and share this story in a way that hurts so much, but helps at the same time. I would have told you, absolutely not. I will go hide in my little hole and not do that. But you don't know how you're going to handle something until you're in the thick of it. And as much as I could say, I would never do that if, you know, my child was in a situation like that. I could never, you know, detach or disown or act as if there was no relationship to this person. But we don't know. And everybody handles things in their own way and on their own terms and in their own timeline. And for a very long time, I really, really waited for their approval, forgiveness, something. You know, yeah. I tried. I would try to reach out, but I really had to be understanding of, am I hurting or am I helping? You know, am I helping them heal or am I making things harder on them? And ultimately for me, I made the decision to just take a step back, not push or force or try to guide their own timeline. And if they were to ever come around and want to have a relationship with me, that I would be here with open arms. If they ever wanted to come around and have a conversation, even if it was just to get out anger or frustration, that I would be here, that I would happily, you know, be that for them. But I can't spend my days waiting for someone else's timeline. That doesn't do any good for anyone.
Right. And what perspective at 18 years old to have, because that would be very, very hard. I mean, you're still supposed to be maturing at that point, right? And
that blows my mind constantly, though. Like,
yes.
Looking backwards now as an adult, like 18-year-olds are babies.
Right.
But so much of my decision making during that season came from a place of knowing that I was at peak conflict, like within myself, within my body, with others, with the court, with everything, that I knew that I was at the peak, and it would not always be like that. So with every decision that I made for anything, I always try to think about, okay, in 10 years, how am I going to feel about this decision? And that I did not make that decision on my own. Okay, I had a therapist. My parents were very helpful. I had legal counsel. I had plenty of people in my corner helping me. but helping me get outside of the moment that I was in. Because even though I was navigating that season, I wanted to make moves and decisions and impact based on the long term. So I would ask myself, like, in 10 years, am I going to regret that I went out and spoke? Because people didn't want me speaking about this. When I started speaking to youth because I couldn't fix this, right? Like, I could not change anything that had happened. I could not bring her back. I could not fix it. And I'm a fixer. So I started speaking to prevent others from repeating my mistake, to keep Laura's memory alive, and to maybe find a reason to wake up every morning. But a lot of people did not want me speaking. They thought I was doing it for the wrong reasons. They wanted me to faceplant. They wanted me to give up. And a lot of days I was like, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should not be doing this. This is not for me. And I would get to that place where I would think, in 10 years, am I going to look back and wish I had done it instead? Because I can't get the time back. And I'm never going to be as relatable as I am right now, 1 year older than, high school seniors, which was like my prime speaking audience. I'm never going to be as relatable as I am right now. And that decision making, like that perspective of looking at things from like, how will I feel about this when this season, not that it's going to ever pass, but like on the other side of this, helped me navigate it in the difficult times.
Wow. So that's really what kept you going and kept you moving forward, and in those moments of just despair, because I'm sure it felt like your life was out of control in a lot of ways at different times, to realize that you were making the best choices that you could every day to move it forward and move through the experience, and not just try to put it on a shelf and somehow crawl into your hole like you mentioned, right? And that is just, I think that would be hard to do at 18 years old and 19
it was
years old.
Very hard to do, but for me, I kept coming back to like, Laura didn't get an opportunity to quit or give up, right? Like, she didn't have that choice. So how dare I throw in the towel because it got hard or uncomfortable or there was criticism? Like, I was given an opportunity to, I want to say like make it right, but there's no making it right. But I was given an opportunity to do the next best thing, to prevent her life from being lost in vain, to make something good come out of something horrible.
Yes.
And if I was just going to throw away that opportunity, how selfish of me.
Yes. Yes. I can totally understand that, and just really commend you for taking the reins and making the best out of something that was really hard and really horrible. And you mentioned too, like what people were saying and people didn't want you speaking, and like explain a little bit of that and what that felt like, or maybe some of the things you were hearing.
So in this season, when it comes to the criticism, like the biggest thing you need to understand to really grasp that moment is I was facing a 10.5 to 15-year prison sentence on the table. And so my case was very publicized too. Like, while I was going through this, it was in all the newspapers, it was on international media outlets, like it was everywhere. And it's not because anything was special about our story. This story happens every single day. What was different about our story is that the person who was responsible for this, was out there admitting that they were wrong. And that's not something that happens every day. So people did not know how to receive that. And they immediately assumed the worst of, oh, she is out here talking because she wants sympathy. She's out here talking because she's trying to get out of her sentence. She's out here trying to make people think X, Y, and Z. Which is a little wild to me because my lawyer definitely did not want me going out and saying I did this. Like, I'm doing the exact opposite of what I should have been doing, right? Like, none of that makes sense when we look at it logically, but this was a very emotionally charged thing. I don't know. People just could not wrap their mind around the fact that I was just trying to make it right. And it all started because I was in therapy and I was getting frustrated. I was diagnosed with like PTSD and survivor's guilt and a whole slew of colorful things. And I was getting really frustrated because I'm like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Like, I don't want to talk in therapy. I'd be like, I don't want to talk to you about this. It's not changing anything. And that's where speaking came from. For me, it was if talking about it is what it takes to heal, I'm going to talk to somebody who it's actually going to benefit. Because at that time when I was dealing with such severe survivor's guilt, helping myself was not enough. I had zero motivation to help myself. But if I could help someone else, that might chip away at that guilt a little bit. And so for me, going out there and being able to maybe prevent somebody else from repeating our mistakes, keeping Laura's memory alive, like feeling like she wasn't lost in vain, like that for me was why I was doing this. But to people who could not see that perspective, all they saw was she's trying to get out of prison. Like she's trying to sway the court. And like that couldn't have been anything further than my reality.
Right. And that's the thing when you're looking at something from afar that's not affecting you personally, like me as someone watching a story and commenting on that and walking away and forgetting about it 10 minutes later, we're doing so much harm by being so negative because for you, it was deeply personal. This is your life and it just always is going to be. But the work that you were doing to try to make good and light come out of something that was very dark, in that person's perspective, they were twisting it and taking it in the wrong direction. And I don't know why we do that as human beings. I don't know. I think maybe just because negativity is so much easier than positivity. We think so many negative thoughts in a day compared to positive ones. And perhaps we just feel like people are ill motivated.
And there was a lot of like things I would hear of after the fact of like, so fascinating, but like, well, I could have never done that. So there's no way you're doing it for that reason, right? Like it's wild that we can just project our own thoughts like that onto other people to think, well, wow, I could never go through something like that and get up and make something good out of it. So there's no way they're doing that for good reasons. There must be another motive here. And it's wild to think that our brain takes us there, but also that we have such low expectations of ourselves to think that we couldn't do that. And again, I know I've already said that, but you truly do not know what you are capable of. And it's that fight or flight mode. And I have no flight in me. Like it does not exist. I have no quit in me. And so the only thing I knew was to keep going. And like, what other options were there? And I don't know. I don't have any quit. I don't.
Yeah. Well, clearly you don't. And that was, I'm sure, God-given in you to make the best out of the situation he knew you would stumble into. Are you loving this episode? Come join us in the Love Light Stories Facebook community, where we make this show come to life. My goal is to make this more than a podcast and truly create a space where we can learn and grow alongside one another in community. Here, we can learn alongside each other with curiosity and humility, and ultimately emulate more love and light to all we meet. You'll be the first to know about upcoming coffee chats, in-person events, book studies, and more. It's here where we'll go deeper in discussion around the topics we explore on the show. You'll even have the chance to meet guests from time to time. Go to stephaniemjacobs.com/manifesto to join. You'll receive an instant download of our manifesto with access to the community. The first 20 people to join will get a personal handwritten note from me, a printed copy of the Love Light Stories manifesto, and a fun surprise too. Not to mention, you'll instantly become a founding member of the Love Light Stories community. I mean, how cool is that? Oh, and did I mention it's all free? So what are you waiting for? Come join us. I just can't wait to meet you, lovely. Did faith play a role in this for you?
It was definitely a roller coaster relationship is the best way that I describe that. Of, like, I grew up in a church. I grew up surrounded by faith. In fact, the first person who visited me at the hospital, aside from my family, was a priest, like, who knew our family well. But there were definitely moments where I was so angry at God and, like, furious, like, how could you take her? Why would, like, so much anger. And then moments where I would, like, cling to my faith of, like, he pulled me from that car for a reason. He's got a bigger plan for this. It was such an up and down relationship depending on how I was processing things, depending on, like, what stage of grief I was in. It was it was ever changing.
Right. And coming out on the other side, is there a different perspective that you have on that faith journey through that process? And, like, have you seen what God was doing, or is that yet to come, I guess?
I think there's, yes, I would say yes. I don't think that there's ever going to be a day where I'm like, I forgive myself. This was all great. It was supposed to happen. Like, never going to be there. But I do understand. I do see all of the good that came from it. Do I think she needed to be taken? Absolutely not. Do I wish I could take her place every single day? But I understand. I see all the great things that came from this. I see the impact that was made. I see the lives that were saved. I see all of that. And there's so much beauty in it. Yes. But it doesn't mean I'm, like, going to agree with it. I'm still going to buck that.
Right. And that gets at the fact that there is so much darkness in our world. Like, we do live in a fallen world. There's difficulty and hardship, yet there's so much light and goodness too that you can find and see through all of that. And it's wrestling with that darkness and light always. And you've taken something so dark and difficult and just in unimaginable ways really just found a way to make good of it. And I'm sure you have impacted just thousands of young people's lives. And I mean, that's just, God perhaps knew that you were the one to carry that burden and save so many more lives.
I struggled with that a lot in the beginning because I'm a very analytical person and all of the data pointed to it should have been me. Like, the car rolled on my side of the car hit the tree. Everything said it should have been me, not her. So there was a large season of why, like, why me, why her, like, so much of that. And it wasn't until I got to a point where I stopped asking questions and I started just stating what was and accepting this current reality, truly speaking as what forced me to do that, right? Because if I was going to have to tell my story, I couldn't ask the audience my story. I now had to tell it. And that forced me to create this narrative and accept the story that I was writing or that was being written and no longer ask.
Right. Yes. And ultimately that has led you into doing what you're doing today, right? Tell us tell everyone what you're doing, what your career has been and just all of that.
Yeah. And here we are 16 years later. And while I don't speak to high schools as much anymore, because now I'm like their mom telling them what to do. I'm not their cool friend anymore. I now have this absolute honor of working with business owners and professionals and helping them share their stories from the stage. I never thought that that decade of speaking would then in turn allow me to help others share their own stories. It's wild to see how it's all come together and connected over the years. But yeah, today I get to help business owners figure out their stories, share it with their audience, use it to make a bigger impact in the world, grow their businesses. And it's been so cool to not just see my impact from the stage, but get to see their impact. There's nothing like that.
Right. It's just beyond your dreams and intentions. however many years ago when you were thinking about the long term, the fact that it turned into something so fruitful, not only for your life, but for all these other business owners' lives as well, is just absolutely incredible. So I just thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And I can imagine each time you tell it, even though it's so many years ago, that it's still difficult to talk about. And I just want to honor that and appreciate you opening up and sharing again for the sake of others' lives. It's just been such a pleasure to meet you and get to chat today.
Thank you so much. It's definitely not something that's easy to share, but when you never know who's listening. You never know who's watching. You never know. Like, it's not the person who stands up and is like, thank you so much for, like, I appreciate you. Thank you for thanking me. But I know that impact. I don't know what will happen when this is shared with the world. I don't know who will listen or who will share it with a friend. And that's the stuff that you just have to have hope that when you do the uncomfortable thing and share your story, that it's making an impact even where you don't see.
Right, exactly. That is so wonderful. Well, if people want to stay connected with you to keep seeing that impact, where can they find you?
Yep, I'm really easy to find. You can find me at jessicarasdall.com online or pretty much on any of the social platforms at Jessica Rasdall, and I'm always available. Come hang out.
As I was editing this episode and listened to our conversation again, I found myself thinking, wow, she is so strong. She is so strong, not only because she had to be, but because she wanted to make something good come of such a tragic incident, even amidst criticism. Really, when I stopped to think about what she had to do at such a young age, I mean, we're still maturing at 18. We shouldn't have to carry such guilt and then public shame on top of it. Personally, I think it would have been very difficult to endure and yet also move through the situation like she did, which actually speaks to her comment about you never truly know what you're capable of until you're living it. And what a great reminder that things tend to look very different from the outside. Jessica's motivations for sharing her story publicly during such an emotionally charged time were very different than what our critics believed. And we can see through this conversation how hurtful that was and subsequently how strong she had to be. Lovely, I hope you loved this episode. The biggest takeaway for me is that our perspective is just that, simply a perspective. There is almost always another perspective too. This episode was a reminder to me to give people the benefit of the doubt, believe their intentions are pure, and just love people. What's your biggest takeaway from this episode? There are so many. Go share it by commenting on the post for this episode on Instagram at Lovelight Stories. Did this episode touch your heart? If you loved today's story and have a relatable experience to share, encouraging words for our guests, or just want to share a comment, go to the show notes for this episode and send us what we like to call heart mail for a chance to have your note featured on an upcoming episode. If there's a large response to any particular story, we might just bring that guest back on the show to dive into your comments, or even have them join us as a guest in the Lovelight Stories Facebook community. It's as easy as sending us a voice message or written note, both easily accessible in today's show notes. Simply go to stephaniemjacobs.com and click on the Stories tab. So, give it a try. Send us your heart mail. I just can't wait to hear what's on your heart. And hey, thank you so much for listening to this podcast and leaning into today's story. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't ever miss an episode. And a great way you can support these conversations is to rate the show and leave a review. And if you have a friend who would like these stories, share it with them too. All of these things are the best way you can support this podcast. So thank you. And until next time, lovelies, keep radiating that love and light to everyone you meet.